Welcome to Church and State with Chris Farrar and Brian McCall. It's the time after Pentecost, and we're here talking about a themed episode in Church and State and the transgender agenda, which we really saw in the last few weeks kind of emerge in both Church and State. So let's start with the state. Just a couple days before we recorded this, South Carolina passed a law for their state, and it's not unlike other states that are doing the same thing, that did two things. One, prohibited people under 18 to consent on their own to have surgery to mutilate their body, to change it from their God-given gender to some other gender, and also required public schools to inform parents if their children were kind of saying they wanted to be a different gender than they are, male saying they're female, trying to change their names, things like that, to inform the parents. I mean, did you ever think we'd reach a point when a state would have to pass a law like this?
Who knew even 5 years ago that we would see something like this become commonplace? But that's how these social contagions work, thanks to the internet and what's left of the legacy media, all of whom are conspiring to bring about the end of the world as quickly as possible. Here we are laughing again. I'm writing a paper on the mystery of laughter. And there are so many things that we laugh at. And Henri Bergson wrote an essay on this, trying to figure out what is the basal character, the basic quality of a thing that makes us laugh. And there really isn't. I mean, it's a very mysterious thing. We're laughing at this because it's absurd.
Yes. No, it's like if you try to explain why a joke's funny, it's not funny anymore.
Right.
But I mean, it is kind of sad. And what's kind of bizarre about this is, children can't just go into the doctor and get an antibiotic without their parents' consent. And again, you're a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. Under 18, you can't even enter into a contract to, buy clothing or anything. There's the minority doctrine that if you're under 18 and enter into a contract, it's voidable. So how is it that doctors are going around without the consent of an adult doing these surgeries? I mean, what's happened to the idea of consent?
Satan is what has happened to the idea of consent. This is obviously a diabolical perversion of the right order of things. And I have to correct you, Brian. You said that these people are trying to change their God-given gender into some other gender. Well, they can never change their God-given gender into any other gender. All they can do is mutilate the gender they have, which is determined at the moment of conception, according to the divine plan and the number of elect. God already knows how many females and how many males will be brought into the world to fill up the number of the elect, even though in heaven there will be neither male nor female in the sexual sense. So yes, this is all part of the divine plan. They're interfering with it with drastic surgeries to mutilate children. What could be more diabolical? And it's obviously a diabolical initiative.
No, and you're right. Thank you for the correction. I mean, it's an attempt, but it's obviously a futile attempt. As even a geneticist will tell you, you can cut off and mutilate all you want, but if we take a sample of your DNA, it's not going to change. It's going to show the chromosomes of a male or a female.
And within literally hours, historically speaking, we went from the idea that there are men and women, two genders, to things like, on official forms, what gender was assigned to you at birth?
Right.
Again, we laugh at just how ridiculous these people are. But this ridiculousness is quite sinister. And we've talked about this before with this gender fluidity nonsense. It's an attack on the created order. God created man and woman. The two become one flesh in holy matrimony. And this is what they're attacking. They cannot abide the existence of an order of created things as determined by the Creator, who created them ex nihilo, out of nothing. They can't live with that. And that's why they will allow overriding parental interests when children say they want to transition in an elementary school, hide it from the parents. Thomas More Society attorneys, by the way, are involved in litigation against that policy in the state of California. Where the parents are forbidden to know when a teacher gets the child involved in this phony baloney transitioning to a different sex. That's how sinister this is.
Well, and it's interesting. I think the great popes of the pre-Vatican II era warned us about all these things. I mean, Pope Pius XI, first on Casti Connubii, warned us of the interconnection of all these issues. The permission of artificial contraception as quote morally illicit is connected to all these other issues: abortion, divorce, and ultimately, although I think he probably couldn't even foresee this, these mixed up idea of thinking I'm God, I say I'm a man, therefore I'm a man. Godlike power is all connected, and this is something I think even those who may be in the pro-life movement or support certain things don't see how all these things are connected. And when I read the story in South Carolina, it reminded me that this battle has been fought before over abortion. I mean, Planned Parenthood v. Casey, one of the elements in that abortion case was the idea of parental consent, that children, people underage, again, who can't buy a car without parental consent, should be allowed to go procure an abortion. And you
Well,
know
yeah, and here's the thing, though. I believe,
yeah,
correct me if I'm
yeah,
wrong, that even in these states which have passed laws banning these procedures on
yeah,
minors, there's an exception for procedures on minors to mutilate them, ruin them for life,
yeah.
if the parents approve
Well,
of it. And so I would ask the question, well, can a parent approve of allowing an 8-year-old to drive the family Cadillac?
right.
Of course not. But the parents can approve of mutilating their own children. Parents who approve that for their children should actually have the children taken away from them
Wow.
because they're a threat to the well-being of those children. That would be one of the few cases where the Division of Youth and Family Services, or its equivalent in any state, should have the right under natural law to intervene and take that child away from those idiotic parents who are threatening the child's welfare, threatening to ruin that child for life.
Well, and you're right. Coming in from that angle, obviously the parents are at fault. But outside of California, there are, I think, fewer parents like that. I would hope. And then the other story, the other side of the story is parents, as you said, who are not consenting to this, not even knowing about it. Children are being swapped into different clothes, calling different names at school. There's one gentleman who I saw interviewed who had his parental rights terminated for opposing this, for just saying
Mm-hmm.
my little
Yeah.
son is not a girl. Whereas you're right, in the past, 20, even 10 years ago, if a parent tried to do this to their child, they'd be taken away from them as abusive to the child. Um,
Yeah. That poor fellow who had his parental rights terminated, I believe he petitioned the Supreme Court for emergency relief and was denied.
wow. Yeah.
So here he is, yeah, deprived of his parental rights because he doesn't think that his son is a girl.
Right.
I
Well,
mean, once you throw off the authority of the Catholic Church, which happened beginning in 1517, everything is on the table in terms of the collapse of the moral order. So that even somebody like Martin Luther would be absolutely horrified by the state of the church today, which leads us, I guess, into a discussion of the state of the church
today.
today, because the citadel has been invaded by the forces of evil in the world. The
Yes.
ramparts have been thrown down, and the enemy has marched right in during the so-called opening to the world at Vatican II.
Well, absolutely. And that does go into our next story, which is again a familiar theme on Pentecost. And again, I don't find it coincidental that they pick these days. It's like when um, the walking zombie in the White House proclaimed Transgender Day on Easter Sunday, and people, oh, it's just a coincidence. There's this woman who now claims she's brother Christian, announced that she is this diocesan hermit in vows, and was a woman, was born a woman, a Presbyterian in college. Quote, transitioned, started mutilating herself, taking hormones, called herself a man, then converted to the Catholic faith. But then decided wanted to become a male religious, tried to get into some seminaries, some religious communities. Fortunately, they said, well, we can't accept you. This is an impediment. But she eventually made her way to Kentucky, where Bishop Stowe, who's got a reputation for basically promoting this agenda, welcomed her with open arms and supervised her profession of vows as brother, in air quotes, Christian, and supported her, quote, coming out statement on, again, Pentecost. Now, in an interview, she says this. you've got to deal with us because God has called us into his church. It's not your church to kick us out of. This is God's church, and God has called us and engrafted us into it.
Well, this is not some poor soul afflicted by gender dysphoria who went through this so-called process of transition, which is a fraud. She hasn't transitioned at all, and regrets it and wants to live a life of prayer. No, this is an arrogant, prideful activist
Yes.
who declared, "This Sunday, I'm planning to come out publicly as transgender." So you're dealing with a militant for an evil cause, and they're allowing this woman pretending to be a man to be a hermit, to have a life devoted to prayer. Prayer, who, I wonder.
But it's fundamentally the same problem that's happened with marriage that's led to divorce. You redefine it in a way that's very personalist. So marriage is about personal satisfaction, feeling good emotionally, physically. And so if the good feelings go away, well, that's the end of the marriage. Well, same thing. The church has become a place where I feel good and get accepted. So you better make me feel good and get accepted because I'm pushing my way into your church. I mean, it's kind of like if you know, can't play tennis, but just say you've got to put me on the national tennis team because I feel like I'm a good tennis player, even though I'm terrible.
Or if you're a lousy men's player and you get on the women's team so you can win some matches,
Right, right.
which is exactly what's going on. So
Yeah.
what we see in certain precincts of the church, especially in the Novus Ordo establishment in America, is the transformation of what was once traditional Roman Catholicism into the functional equivalent of Episcopalianism.
Mm.
These places have become social clubs. Here we see why the Novus Ordo, as we call it, is just dying out. There are no vocations, or very few, if any, except in the most conservative of the Novus Ordo dioceses, whereas the traditionalist orders are all flourishing. And we've seen article after article now about how young people have had enough of this insanity. They want the traditional Catholic faith. They want nothing to do with the kind of situation in which this arrogant woman pretending to be a man can demand acceptance as a man, contrary to the divine plan, and then claim to be a Catholic hermit. It's ludicrous.
Well, it's sort of, the way things are going is just make pretend reality, make what I want be reality. So we're going to see this. We're already seeing this thanks to the doctrine of the document of the kissing cardinal. Two men. Well, we're just going to say this is a marriage just blessed as such. Well, we're not really doing that's what it is. And I think the next step that I predict we're going to see in a year is women dressed up in dalmatics claiming they're deacons, which, with some kind of Jesuitical distinction that they're deacons but not ordained deacons. They're
And this under the leadership of the Pope, who just said the other day that of course we can't have women deacons in the sacramental sense, so he'll just dress them up as deacons, and they'll be de facto deacons, and then the rudderless ship under this Pope will continue to run aground. And meanwhile, mysteriously enough, we have a Pope who no longer says Mass, apparently.
really, I hadn't heard that.
Oh, yeah, doesn't say Mass anymore. That's what the reports are. So,
I mean,
what
he's
does
kind
that
of
symbolize, I wonder?
he's kind of busy as Pope. I can see you got to cut something out.
Well, you can go and combat global warming, but he can't
Right.
offer the holy sacrifice of the Mass if he even
Yeah.
believes it's the holy sacrifice of the Mass.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, the root of this essentially is the fundamental error of man-centeredness and the fundamental error of nominalism, that things are not what they are in reality, that there is not a reality. It's we just name things what they are, and we are in control of reality. And that's been that rebellion, from I you say 1517. I think it goes back even before that, and then plays itself out in modern culture. We're seeing the sort of final death throes of this self-centered, man-centered, subjectivist reality, right in front of us.
Including the Pope, who doesn't say Mass. And in case people think that's an extravagant claim, Philip Lawler has just written an article on this, reporting that dozens of media outlets are reporting that Pope Francis did not deliver a homily. That's true, but what's more remarkable is that he did not celebrate the Mass. Still more remarkable, Pope Francis has not been the principal celebrant at a public Mass for several months. And Loyola goes on to say, there's no physical reason he couldn't find some way to celebrate Mass despite his disabilities. And he says, remember the last days of John Paul II, tormented and crippled by disease, still found the strength to celebrate Mass. But not this character who is going to attend, or has he already attended? I don't know, I've lost track. The G2 summit. He can do that, but he can't celebrate Mass. Make of it what you will. Whatever you make of it, it's not good.
Well, again, if Maximilian Kolbe could find a way to offer the Holy Sacrifice in a Nazi prison camp, there's pretty much no excuse at that point.
But again, that's symbolic of the state of affairs, that the absolute collapse under this Pope of the regular order of the Church, reaching what has to be. I mean, what more can we expect? The final stage in that continuing process of decay, to quote Cardinal Ratzinger, that followed the Second Vatican Council, and which he says unjustly, but I say quite obviously, has been attributed to the Council itself and its ambiguous documents, its opening to the world, its new orientation for the Church, all of which have been catastrophic. Quite obviously, no one can really dispute it any longer.
Well, and that raises, I think, a related point. One of the errors of, I think, conservative-minded people, both in church and state, is to think, if I just throw a bone to the progressives, if we just let it go this far, we can kind of contain it. So again, within Vatican II, I think, well, if we could just have a little opening here, allow this, we'll contain it, and we can avoid a worse harm. Same thing politically. I mean, the so-called Republicans, well, if we work with the Democrats, we allow this, we'll avoid a greater danger than if we just say no. And I think that's been really a flaw the past couple decades, that ultimately never does anything. It just maybe slows the progression down a course a little bit, but ultimately the progressives get where they wanted to be in the first place.
Sure, it's like the Bolsheviks versus the Mensheviks.
Hmm.
The Bolsheviks wanted to destroy everything and murder anyone who stood in their way, and the Mensheviks said, not so fast. Slow down.
Let's take our time with this.
The problem is the enemy is absolutely inflexible in its pursuit of evil, but we are not correspondingly absolutely inflexible in the defense of the truth. And we see this in both church and state. We see this with the prelates who will not stand up to the progressives and give ground constantly, so that now we have a woman pretending to be a man who's a hermit. And then we see it in the Republican Party in the United States, which doesn't have the courage to stand up to the implacable foe, and so constantly gives ground, basically doing their will while at best attempting to slow it down, which is why, by the way, all the powers that be in the United States and even on the global scene are arrayed against a former playboy, still a billionaire, named Donald J. Trump. Absolutely astonishing political phenomenon.
It is. And I mean, that is unfolding every day, that phenomenon, changing almost by the hour. But it's sort of interesting. So as you said, a playboy billionaire can attract the attention. People says something about the state of politics in the country, right? That sort of can appeal to so many people, to tens of millions of Americans. It sort of says a lot about the lack of professional politicians having any credibility.
Well, what we need is the equivalent of a MAGA Pope who can make the church great again. It won't involve wearing any red caps, I can assure you of that, unless it's a Cardinals hat.
Well, it's funny. Back in 2016, I wrote I think it was for the Remnant, a satire piece called "Donald Trump is running in the next conclave for Pope to make the church great again," and
I remember that. I was alluding to that, actually.
Yes. Promised to build communion rails and make the Jesuits pay for it, I think.
Yeah, and then the traditional Catholics will be so tired of winning that they say we don't want to win anymore.
Right, exactly.
But we laugh at that as well because of the absurdity of the whole situation. Yeah. But that's what's going to happen. There will be in the church the equivalent, but obviously a holy equivalent, yes, not a secular political one, right, of a pope who restores things. It's inevitable. Inevitable before the world finally is rolled up like a scroll and tossed aside, as the Old Testament says. And then the new heavens and the new earth are ushered in. But we're still not there yet. We haven't seen the appearance of Antichrist. Enoch and Elias have not returned to combat the Antichrist. So we're still not in the actual last days, but we're getting ever closer.
Hmm. Well, and obviously, even before that, we haven't seen the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, the conversion of Russia, and I think it's pretty clear at this point the consecration of Russia. I mean, there was maybe some hope a couple years ago with what Francis tried, but clearly, the way things have progressed, as Father Gruner always used to say, the consecration of Russia would bring about such dramatic events that it'd be impossible to deny its power. But I don't know if you've seen anything. I haven't seen anything
No, we
close to
will.
it.
Yeah, we're seeing what Our Lady said about the other defective ceremonies of consecration, that there would be some benefit. For
Yes.
example, the end of World War II,
Yes.
because of the attempted consecration by Pius XII. So there was some benefit. We've seen some benefit in Russia too. Paradoxically enough, Russia is now a force for relative cultural conservatism
Hmm.
in the world today. Whatever you think of Vladimir Putin, whether you think he's a dictator, a thug, a murderer, or whatever, in spite of everything, we see Russia is becoming a countercultural country. Not to say that abortion still isn't legal in Russia. Divorce is still legal in Russia. All the evils that we see in this country are still legalized and spreading everywhere in Russia. But there has been a change. Obviously, it's no longer a communist dictatorship.
Hmm.
It's some sort of authoritarian regime, but not communist. So that's partial benefit. Well, when the conversion of Russia finally happens, there will be a reunification, as the great mystic and prophet Soloviev, not even a Catholic, said, during some kind of great conflict between the East and the West.
Hmm.
And then perhaps we'll see the authentic consecration of Russia. Just Russia, please, for once.
Yes.
And then we'll have the reunification of the Eastern and Western churches.
Well, and a reminder, as part of our role to play in that is the request of Our Lady to make the 5 first Saturdays. Obviously, the Pope is supposed to consecrate Russia together with all the bishops of the world, but we have been asked to consecrate those first Saturdays to her by making a communion of reparation. And, we're really approaching that 100-year deadline. Many times in history, we've seen that kings and peoples have been granted 100 years. The King of France was given 100 years to consecrate France to the Sacred Heart. Well, it was in almost 100 years ago, coming up next year, that Our Lady requested the devotion of the 5 first Saturdays. So the Fatima Center is promoting a 100 by 100 to get 100,000 first Saturday communions of reparation by the 100th anniversary of that request to show Our Lady that we are responding. So if you go to the Fatima Center 100 by 100, you can see the details of that. If you don't know how to make a first Saturday, all the information's there. You can sign up and report every communion, every first Saturday communion you've made. Involves going to confession within 8 days, offering your communion reparation for offenses against the Immaculate Heart, saying a 5 decade rosary, and then meditating for 15 minutes on the rosary. And if you have trouble meditating, like most people, it's a difficult task. The
Yep.
Fatima Center even provides some recorded meditations. So you can just put it on your phone, close your eyes, and listen to a meditation. So it takes a lot of the difficulty out of it. So really, no excuse to do this part. So rather than just complaining about popes not doing their job, we can do our job.
Oh, that reminds me. I went on a retreat once, and the retreat master said, "You'll do two 20-minute meditations today, and you will find at the end of the day, you will be physically exhausted
Yeah.
because Americans don't meditate. And when
Yes.
they try, you have to use the brain burns calories. And he said, you will collapse into bed
Yes.
if you actually complete two 20-minute meditations. So it's not easy. But, with these aids, yes, it can be done. So that's one sign. And by the way, the 100th anniversary of the apparition at which Our Lady said the moment has come to do the consecration will be in 2029.
Yes.
So that's fast approaching.
So do what we can between now and then, and again, doing the good first Saturday can build that habit of mental prayer. That is so important. As you said, it is. I remember my first 5 day Ignatian retreat. After 5 days, I was famished. Every head I collapsed into
Yep.
bed. You're right. I had no trouble falling asleep, and I thought, well, I didn't do anything physically exerting today. But it is what we're made for. We're rational creatures, and it's putting our mind, raising it to God.
By the way, if I could end with a personal request, I'm involved in some pretty severe legal battles with some of these forces we've been talking about. So I would ask everyone watching this to offer some prayers in there and make this one of their intentions, that we prevail in these legal battles. I won't say more about it other than I need your prayers.
Definitely, we'll keep that in our prayers. And what a surprise! You're engaged fighting these forces. Never done that before. But
No.
well, thanks, Chris. It was good talking about this subject, the invasion of the transgender ideology in church and state. And hope to see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks. God bless, Brian.